Now let us look at types of companies. So the types of companies, right? The Companies Act recognizes 4 types of companies. There are 4 types of companies under the Companies Act 2013. The first one is private limited liability company. The second one is public limited liability company. The third one is companies limited by guarantees. And lastly, state-owned companies. If you can see properly, the first 3 was about limited. These ones are called limited liability companies. Limited liability companies. We talked what limited liability companies are, right? We said that it means that their liability is limited to a certain extent. It can never go beyond that. So these limited liability companies can be categorized into 2, right? Limited by shares, then or limited by guarantee, right? So the first 2 here, private limited liability company and public limited liability company, those ones are limited by shares. Private and public limited liability companies, those are categorized as limited by shares. What we mean is that shareholders' liability will be limited to the extent of unpaid shares. For example, if a shareholder acquires shares in this company, right? He has fully paid for all his shares. It means that if this company can go into liquidation or any other situation where people are requesting money from it and the company does not have, these guys or the financiers or the people that have bought the money cannot go to the shareholders and take anything because it is limited to any amount that has not been paid yet. But if the shareholder owns shares in this company but has not completely paid everything yet, right? He has only paid 75% of the shares, right? Because as we know from accounting too, shares are actually paid in bits and bits. First call, second call. So by the time the company is actually winding up, you haven't paid everything. Maybe you paid 75% and you are remaining with 25%. What it means is that you'll be liable to that extent of the unpaid money. It means that people can come and request that unpaid money from you. But otherwise, if you have fully paid it, you are unlimited. Your liability is limited to any unpaid shares, right? So those ones are limited by shares. While when you are limited by guarantee, it means that you are limited to an extent that you agree to pay if the company is to wind up. So this usually happens with the charities and NGOs. So the trustees who are the members, right? The trustees, right? Oh, right? To the NGO, right? Akamapaka NGO imeneyi, what they do is amanya kuti company izakakhala kuti ikutha and ndi ngongole alesa amanena kuti ine ndizapereka ku 50,000 amanena yekha alesa amanena ine ndizapereka ku 600,000 the company idapeza kuti ikutha ndi ngongole ine ndizapereka ku 500,000 So you will be limited to the extent of the amount that you agreed to pay. It means ngati kutha azabwera kuwuzana kuti asemuna tozana kuti kapate zakamata ndipo lizakhala kuti ili ndi ngongole tizabwera kwenu uzatenga ndalama. That's limited by guarantee. You are guaranteeing, or you're being a guarantor towards the company. What you are saying is mukakanika kutolera ndalama kwa company mutha kuzatolera kwa ineyo ndalama zokwana izi. Because ukamana kuti I've guaranteed somebody's meaning, you mean kuna kuti ngati munthu yakanike kulipira muzabwera kwa ine. For example, A borrows money from B, right? And umamuuza C, umamuuza B kuti ambwereke ndalamazo, akakanika ulipira ameneyo izalipira ndine. So in a situation where you're saying that it is limited by guarantee, is meaning the trustees or the members to this NGO, amana kuti ngati company imene ili separately going to ikakanika ulipira ndalama zake, ifeyo tizalipirako ndalama zokwana izi. Right? So it is limited to the amount of money that you are saying that uzabereka. Right. And the other one is basically what? State-owned. So we're saying that limited liability companies can be either categorized as limited by shares or limited by guarantees. And limited by shares, you have the public limited company and the private limited liability company. Right. But generally, you have 4 types of companies highlighted in 2013 Companies Act. Private company, private limited company, publicly limited company, company limited by guarantee, and also state-owned companies. So let us look at each in turn. So let us look at limited liability, private limited liability company. So I know from your earlier studies, you know what a private company is, right? But in this module, it has been defined differently. So this is how you are supposed to write it in the exam. Not the one that you already know, right? The bad thing about the law is that you have to say it as it is in the law, right? So what is a private limited liability company? You have to define it as per section 23 subsection 1. And a private limited liability company has been defined as one that consists firstly of a minimum of 1 person and a maximum of 50 people. 1. 2. Secondly, its memorandum prohibits it from offering any of its securities to the public. So if you are to define it as per section 21, section 23 subsection 1, you have to make sure that you talk about the number of people, a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 50. And secondly, talk about that the memorandum of association prohibit it from issuing its securities to the public. When I talk about securities, we're talking about shares. It means that if you open a private limited liability company, you cannot sell your shares to the public. Right? You cannot sell shares to the public. You cannot offer your shares to the public. And section 2 of Companies Act also has defined one person company. So there are situations where you can have a one person company, because an private company is a company that has a minimum of 1 person. That means 1 person company tokalapo muntu kala muntu mosi, shareholder muntu mosi. So this company with 1 person is called one person company, and section 2 has defined it as a private company because it is within the range, right? It is within the range of 1 to 50, right? So it's a private company in which the only shareholder is also the sole director of the company. So a one person company is that the only shareholder of the company is also the only director of the company. You have one shareholder and you also want one director. The same person. One shareholder and one director. It means if you have one shareholder and 2 directors, that's not one person company. You have to have one shareholder And the same shareholder should also be the only director of the company. Then that's a what? One person company. Right? So they're saying that this does not include a company in which only shareholder is another company. We know from our knowledge of accounting and group accounts, tinaphunzira zona kuti a company can own shares in another company. So for example, company A owns all the shares in company B. Does this qualify to be one person company? And this is excluded because one thing is this. Because although this one is the sole shareholder or the only shareholder, he cannot be the director of this company. We know that a director has to be a person, right? A shareholder can be a company, but a director has to be a person. It means that this company will appoint what? Other directors. So he won't be the same person. So in a case where a company owns all the shares of another company, it is not a one-person company. B is not a one-person company. Sorry, just because it is owned by one company. So that's excluded from the definition of one-person company. So Section 62, subsection 1 of the Act allows members of a company to increase membership from a single member to 2 or more members if the single member has passed a resolution to that effect. So what they're saying is, if you are a one-person company, you can actually increase the membership by just passing a resolution. A resolution is just basically sort of an agreement, right? If you can just say that I have agreed that I want to increase the number of members from just only me to 2 or more people, then by just putting this in writing, you have passed a resolution and you can now increase the number of members from one person to what? To a number of people, right? So you have to make sure that you put this in writing, this agreement in writing. That's called a resolution. So the Act also allows the private company to re-register as a public company by passing a special resolution, otherwise complying with other provision of the Act. I would also know that it is possible for you to move from being a private company, right, to being a public company, re-registering it. Right? A private company to a public company. So we know that it is from one person to 50. So you can re-register this from being a private company to a public company. For you to do this, you just have to pass a special resolution. This is a sort of a type of resolution or agreement that is made. This type of agreement that is made requires that over 75% of the people should agree to it. It means ngati mu company mo muli ndi anthu okwana 10, right? More than 7 people should agree kuna kuti tikufuna tipange re-register ikhale public company. More than 75% of the members should agree to this resolution. Not 50%, but more than 75%. Right? It means that if more than 75%, right? For example, if 9 people have agreed that we want to re-register this to being a public company, it means that it can re-register to being a public company. But only 6 people out of the 10 have agreed. That means it cannot, because the resolution passed is no longer a special resolution, right? It is called a what? An ordinary resolution. Where an ordinary resolution just means that the majority, more than 50%. More than 50%. So we know that 6 is more than 50%. right? But it is not a special resolution because it hasn't exceeded what? 75%. So for you to re-register from a private company to a public company, you just have to pass a special resolution to effect this. Now let us look at a public limited liability company. So a public limited liability company has been defined in section 24 as a company that consists of a minimum of 3 people. It consists a minimum of 3 people and the maximum sana gambi. That means you can have 1 million members, right? So it has a minimum of 3 people. That's a minimum. 1. 2. Its memorandum permits it to actually issue its securities to the public. So they can actually issue their shares to the public. And lastly, its memorandum permit the transferability of its securities. So for you to actually comfortably define what a public limited company is, as stated in section 24, first you have to talk about the number of people, that it has to have a minimum of 3 people. 2, its memorandum should permit the offering of its security to the public. And its memorandum should permit the transferability of security. What we mean by transferability is that I can be able to sell my shares to someone else easily, right? It means that if I buy shares and I'm tired of those shares, I can easily, for example, John has shares in a company, right? And I'm tired of these shares. I can easily sell them to Mary, right? This is basically what? Transferability, right? So its memorandum actually allows the transferability of the shares from one person to another. That's basically the definition of a public limited liability company. So those two, private limited liability company and private limited company, form what we call limited liability company by shares. So it is important to note that according to Auction Holding Limited versus Hara and others, all companies registered on the stock exchange are public limited companies and not vice versa. Maybe this is something that you have heard before. Munava listed company. Listed company. The Kamaroti listed company is a company that actually trades on the stock exchange. Stock exchange. Stock exchange. What is the stock exchange? Stock exchange is a market where securities are traded. Is a market where securities are traded. So this law here, what they are saying is, if your company is trading on the stock exchange, it is called that you are listed on the stock exchange. So akutuzana kuti all companies that are listed are supposed to be what? Public companies. And I don't. But it does not mean that all public companies are listed companies. Tivesisane pamene. Before you can be a public company, but you are not allowed to trade on a stock exchange. Because you have to satisfy certain things for you to trade on the stock exchange. So all listed companies are public companies. But not all public companies are listed companies. The logic is like that. Because stock exchange is basically a market where we are trading securities. Then between private and the private and the what? Private and the public, we know that private is prohibited from trading its shares or securities to the public. Right? It means that the only company that can be trading here on the stock exchange is a public company. That's the first thing. But not all the companies satisfy the conditions to trade here. They have to follow things, or they have to apply for them to trade. So they have to satisfy certain requirements. Because, for example, right, there are other companies that are public companies, but they are not listed on the stock exchange. So this was stated in the case, right? Holdings Limited and Hara and others. So, mukesi ngati imeneyi, okay, sanaifotokoze mu scenario, that means it's not really relevant, right? But it means anapanga identify not all public companies are listed company, but all listed companies are public companies. That's the principle that is in this case. It means that mudakumana this scenario akufotokoza nokuti muna atokangana akunena kuti there's agreement that one company one person is arguing kuti all public companies are listed companies. So if you had to answer a question like that, you could say that all public companies are not listed companies, but all listed companies are public companies, as stated in the case of Auction Holdings Limited versus Hara and others. Do you know that? Wafotokoza, right? Wafotokoza case yako amenepo ndi principle yako. Right? The principle has been supported by a case. That's why it is very important to memorize the cases. Not all cases, because the other cases that are just by fire, by force, you just have to memorize them, but others are not really common or commonly asked or commonly used. Like this one wouldn't be commonly used. But it would earn you marks if a question like that was to appear. And you were actually were to cite this case. But if in the exam, amapanga argument, and you were principle mena kuti all public companies are not listed companies, but all listed companies are public companies, you can mention that principle. That's a rule, right? That's a rule. Without supporting the case. Just measuring that principle, right? You can actually say that. But you know that you have missed out some marks on on citing the case that can back your principle. Right? For example, if it was a 10 marks, they might give you maybe 6 or 7 marks. And you have lost 3 marks, which would have been awarded for you to cite either a case or a section. So the Act allows for public companies to re-register to being a private company by passing a special resolution. So if it is a public company, it is also allowed to re-register. To re-register from being a public company to being a private company. That is if the people have passed a special resolution. We've said that a special resolution is a resolution or an agreement where over 75% of the members have agreed to it. So it means that you can re-register from being a public company and re-registering to being a private company. Now, let us look at company limited by guarantee. Company limited by guarantee. So, a company limited by guarantee is a type of limited liability company, right? Let us now look at it in detail. Right? Section 25 of the Act is the one that have defined what a company limited by guarantee is. So, is a one formed on the principle of having a liability of its members limited by the Constitution to such an amount as the members may respectively undertake to contribute to the assets of the company in the event of it being wound up. So what you're saying is, the first thing in the definition is it is a company which its members' liability is only limited to the amount that each member undertook to pay when the company is winding up. Each member, right, amanena kuti company kamazatha ndipo company ini ngongole ine nzalipira 500,000 amalemba iwo cha ino nzalipira 500,000 ine company kamazatha ndiye kuti nzalipira 1 million. Let's say kuti alipo anthu 4, right? Wina akuti 1 million, number 1 million. Wina akuti 2 million. Wina akuti 3 million. Wina akuti 4 million. Right? If company ili ngongole zokwana 50 million, ndipo company ikukanika kulipira, zimene angathe kukatenga kwa anthu awa, mamembers wa, kwa uyu akatenga kwa 1 million yo. Kwa ndimene anavomereza kuti atha kuzapereka. 2, uyu akatenga ku 2 million yo. Akatenga ku 3 million yo. Akatenga ku 4 million. Together, atha kulipira ngongole zokwana 10 million. It means that 40 million yosalirayo, ipeza kuti sinalipidwe kwa anthu. Right? Because company ilibe drama. Komanso drama zonse zimene ananena kuti my members azapereka apereka. They are only limited to that amount. So kwasa 40 million mutipase so no. They are only limited to the extent in which each member undertook, right, in the constitution to pay when the company is winding up. That's the first part in the definition of company limited by grantee. The second part that you also have to mention is basically is formed for the sole purpose of operating as a charity or a not-for-profit organization. So these two elements will actually define a company limited by grantee. First, their members' liability is limited to the extent each member undertook to pay when the company is winding up. The second thing is basically the company's sole purpose is operating as a charity or a not-for-profit organization. So these two actually define what a limited liability company by guarantee is. A limited liability company by guarantee is. That's basically in terms of section 25. But also, section 37 also added something else, right? Right? To do with what? To do with limited liability company. They said that the act prohibits the company from distributing its profit. Ndipo company ikakhautiyelo ikupanga ma-profit bwanji. Sangagawane ma-members drama imeneyo. No, it's prohibited. Ndekuti fusata kufusana kuti define what a company limited by grantee is as said in section 25, you just have to mention 2. But if they keep it open-end, you can actually mention 3. The first is that, what you're saying is liability is limited to the extent each member undertook what to pay when the company is winding up. 2, the sole purpose is basically operating as a charity. And 3, its memorandum, right, prohibits it from distributing any profit. So these 3 elements are actually defining what a company limited by guarantee is. So members have no liability unless and until company goes into liquidation. These guys, called the trustee or the members, right, are not entitled to pay any money until company kutha. Ndekuti company mumvesesa baba. Ngati company si kutha koma ndi ngongole ya 50 million. Sakwena apite kwa mandani kwa ma members akatenge drama. Unless company kutha, that's when you can go to the members and ask them to pay the money that they guaranteed. Koma ngati company ndi ngongole, ikukanika olipira koma si kutha. Right? Imeneyo simukwena mukatenge drama kwamene. Koma ngati mwavomerezana kuti as a company ingotha, anthu ena ake apangisa kuti company ithe, right? Then you'll be entitled as members to pay the money that you agreed to pay when the company is winding up. Lesi kuti nthawi yonse mmangonena kuti ngati company ilibe drama kuti kwa members ati pase drama ita. No. You're only going to give them money if the company is winding up. Ndipo mumvesese apa. Olo company tati ma members ukaphatiza ngongole the amount that the guaranteed will azapereka ndi 60 million. Olo company itanena kuti drama zidakhala kuti tangotenga kwa awawa kutipasa tipereka ngongole bwinobwino, right? Ndipo company iziyenda bwinobwino. Awa sakwenabe kupereka. Apereka pokapoka company iyi ikutha. They're entitled or they're obliged to pay this 60 million. So basically that's it. They're only going to pay when the company is ending. So when this happens, those who are members at the time are required, if necessary, to contribute towards the payment of the company's debts and the liability and the cost of winding up in accordance with the guarantee, the amount that they agreed to pay, or the amount that they agreed to undertake when the company is winding up. So if you are still a member, right, and the company is winding up, you're supposed to pay the amount that you agreed. So the amount guaranteed will be whatever sum stated in the statement of guarantee confirmation. So where you write or you promise, right? It's a statement called the statement of guarantee. So in this statement of a guarantee, all the members amalemba kuti company ikamazatha ndipo company ili ndi ngongole tizalipira ndalama zakuti. Company ikamazatha tizalipira ndalama mwakuti. Mu statement imene imachedwa statement of guarantee. That means company kungotha, right? Anyake ma directors akapita mu statement of guarantee or ma liquidators, right? Ma liquidators azapita mutimo mu statement of guarantee kumakaona kuti member uyanana kuti azalipira ndalama zingati. Uyanana kuti azalipira ndalama zingati. Ukapanga collect ndalama zimenezo kwa anthu ameneyo. That's basically it. Something that we have to know is that this is not an asset. Mumvesese. Chifukwa chona kuti mamembers zinaka anapanga promise kuti azapereka ndalama zina musamawerenge kuti ndi asset. Right? Ngati company ikuyenda musamawerenge kuti tili ndi asset inake kwa members because they guaranteed. No. This is sort of a contingent liability. Right? This liability will only exist to these members if the company is winding up first, and two, if the company still has debt to pay. So it is only contingent or dependent on the event that the company is winding up. And the company what? Desimganira kuna kuti kupita ku bank kuna kuti fati bacon drama so kwana 50 million. Chifukwa ngati tizakanike company kamazatha mukuziwa kale kuti azatibwere azalipira drama. They have already guaranteed. You cannot use this guarantee as a security. Right? This is only a contingent liability. This liability is only existing if the members at the company is ending and the company still owes money. And lastly, let's finish by looking at the state-owned company. Right? The state-owned company has defined as a company companies in which a company controlled within the means of the act by the government. So it is a company controlled by the government, right? Within the means of the act. So pamakhala ma act osiyanasiyana amene amapanga form company. For example, the Accountants and Auditors Act inapanga form ICAM as a company. That's a state-owned company. So it means that that act, right, has formed the company. It means that the controlling of that company will be in the means or within what that act is saying, right? What that act is saying. So we're saying that first thing is a company that is controlled by the government, right? And within the means of the act, right? It means they have to follow the act to what? To control this company. That's basically a state-owned. Examples could be Eskom, Water Board, MAB, ICAM, and so on and so forth. Those are state-owned companies. In other words, if you were lost, these are companies owned, right, and controlled by the government, right? That's basically what is a state-owned. What is a state-owned according to section 26? You have to say it according to what this section? You have to say section 26. You have to say that is a company controlled by the government within the means of the act, or is a company controlled within the means of the act by the government. So that's basically it. So in Malawi, these companies are commonly called parastatals or statutory corporations. So the other name of state-owned companies are called parastatals or statutory corporations. So the provisions of the acts pertaining to the public company do apply to all state-owned companies. So provisions or whatever is written in the Companies Act 2013 also applies to these state-owned companies, right? Also apply to these state-owned companies. So whatever is written, because that's basically provisions, right? Whatever is written in the Act 2013 will also apply to the state-owned company. It doesn't only apply to private companies, public companies, and companies limited by guarantee. No, that also applies to the companies owned by the government, state-owned. However, the minister may, where appropriate, and by notice published in the Gazette, exempt state-owned from the provision of the Act. So, the minister, right, can actually make an appropriate notice and publish this in a Gazette, right? The Gazette is just basically a magazine of law, right? It's called the Gazette, right? So whatever law is published has to be put in the Gazette. I would call it the magazine of law, right? So whatever law is published has to be gazetted. So if the minister, whatever minister, if he finish, Minister of Finance can talk about MAB, Minister of Agriculture can talk about green belts, right? Those companies, right? Minister of Energy can talk about maybe Eskom, right? And so on and so forth, right? So if this minister, right, feels it appropriate, right, to exempt that company from the provisions of the Companies Act, he can do that. But before this has to be applied, it has to be gazetted first. It means that it has been accepted by the parliament. Because being gazetted, it means that it has been accepted by the parliament. So he can't do this in his own power. The parliament has to agree to it and has to be gazetted. So he can exempt, right, the company, whatever company state-owned, from some provisions of the Companies Act. Okay, I want this company, this provision, company, samabangena follow. So they'll take it to the parliament, they'll pass a bill, they'll agree to it, they'll gazette it. After gazetting it, now it means that that provision will not apply to that state-owned government. So these are the powers of the particular ministry. So that's to do with the 4 types of companies. Thank you.